Rouen wakes cold, stone rinsed by a night of rain, banners drooping like tired wings. A carpenter's crew has raised a scaffold of wood and straw, staking it with iron rings and a post thick as a mast. Dominican friars confer in low tones. English soldiers stamp their boots, then laugh too loudly at nothing. Market women stand farther back, shawls tight, eyes round, baskets clutched. The ordinary commerce of a Wednesday arrested by the arrival of a spectacle. Joan is 19, perhaps less in the morning light, small, straight-backed, a bruise of fatigue under each eye. Her hair has grown since the prison shears, a stubborn boyish crop. Chains circle her waist and wrists. She wears a white shift. To those who watched her ride months earlier, armored and banner forward, she looks like a candle snuffed to a coal. A scribe hurries beside her to catch notable words. Later, the ink will pretend it was all said exactly so. The crowd works its way into silence that feels like weather. They judged her first in rooms where the air stood stale and torches made scripture smoke. Pierre Cochon, the bishop in charge, spoke as exact as a locksmith. His purpose was to prove the girl from Domremy a disorderly imagination in breeches, rebellious against church and crown. He ringed himself with doctors of law and theology, many learned, some merely eager to please an English purse. They asked about angels and armor, saints and signals, names she gave the voices, why she would not submit her visions to the church's correction. Joan answered as if truth were a plain road. She said she was a farmer's daughter who heard voices she recognized like neighbors, St. Michael, St. Catherine, St. Margaret. They told her France was not forsaken, and that God would lift a siege if men would lift their fear. She asked for a sign, then brought one wearing armor. At Orléans, she stood on the wall with her standard and would not quit, though arrows fretted the wood around her hands. She said she would rather hold that banner than a sword, for the banner did not kill. In her telling, the voices never lied, and when they fell quiet, she kept faith like a person feeling the warmth of a fire she could not see. She did not dress the story for court. She was too young for guile and too proud for apology. When they called her Jean, she said, "Call me Johanna." When they asked about the promise of rescue she once uttered, she answered that rescue is not always release. The notaries wrote and wrote, turning her sentences into instruments. In the margins, another sentence grew, that her clothes and her courage were the same act. They kept her in English hands between sessions, in a castle with guards who joked about virtue until it sounded like a coin scraped thin. She asked for a church prison and women to guard her. She received men and iron. She tried to leap once from a tower, like a soul testing its wings, and survived, bruised, repentant, still certain. At last, worn by questions and delay, she signed a paper she could barely read, a recantation pinned to her by hunger and fear, promising to lay aside men's dress and submit. For a few days, the machinery of punishment paused. Then they found her again, in hose and tunic. She said men pressed her, and she needed the clothes for modesty, and besides, her voices had returned and told her to be brave. The court called it relapse, obstinate heresy, contempt. This is how the square filled and why the stake rose. A preacher, borrowing thunder from a book that once comforted him, proclaimed witchcraft, falsehood, the scandal of a woman in men's dress. Soldiers heard the summaries they required. Townspeople heard a softer thing. A girl who was a flame and is now a wick to be pinched. Joan asked for a cross. An English soldier, moved against his own legend, twisted 2 sticks into one and handed it up. A priest brought a processional cross as well and kept it lifted where she could see. They read the sentence to the air. To Joan, it was wind. She asked that they light the fire after she commended herself. They obeyed in the way men obey a person they fear to be wrong about. The first tongues of flame climbed and crackled without heat, then heat arrived like a crowd. She cried out once plainly, then again into smoke, both times the same name. A soldier, weeping despite the armor of ridicule he wore, threw a brand to make it quick. The friars murmured the prayers for the dying, and one of them later testified that she called on Jesus until she could not breathe. Rouen exhaled. Soldiers joked in the brittle manner of men too near something they could not endure. The bishop went back to his rooms and ordered warm wine. The town returned, bit by bit, to bread, debts, washing. But there were men who could not sleep. One was an English soldier who helped build the platform. He told anyone who listened that he had damned himself. Another was a secretary who heard the girl say she loved the church and God more than herself. He found that sentence walking beside him in alleys. Years slipped and turned the dead girl into an argument. The English lost what they hoped her burning would secure. France remembered a standard craning over a storm of arrows. The king she helped to crown forgot, as kings do, until remembering became useful. The record remained, a braid of Latin and gossip and precision, all of it smelling of rooms where she was not allowed to sleep. In 1456, her family, with a court convened by the Pope, pressed for a nullification. Witnesses told their parts. Villagers who heard the bell summon her to visions. Captains who watched her take a bastion. Priests who saw no devil in her eyes. Scholars who regretted lending their names. The verdict scraped the ink from the first trial and pronounced it crooked. Centuries passed. Painters and poets made 1,000 versions of her face. Nations borrowed her for their flags. Skeptics sorted the voices into headaches and resolve. Believers sorted the headaches back into voices. Each time a city was nearly lost, and a handful steadied it with a banner and a word, the story stood up and asked to be told again. Each time a woman was told obedience looks one way and boldness another, someone remembered the girl who asked for armor and a horse and gave the year a new calendar. To stand in Rouen now is to hear traffic and the neat chime of commerce. A plaque marks the place. A church shaped like a wave leans over a market where fish gleam on ice. The square does what squares do: buy and sell, meet and go. Breathe long, and you can catch what the old bell tried to say. That judgment can be legal and wrong, courage correct and out of season, faith spoken in a child's grammar enough to unnerve men who have forgotten their own. The Seine still takes every kind of ship. The wind still opens and closes banners along the quay. Joan's last words belonged to no party. They were simple and could be faked, but they were said by a girl whose every other sentence they tried for months to break and could not. She said, Jesus. She asked for the cross to be lifted. She pardoned her accusers, or so a man who needed forgiving recorded it. Let that be enough if we are greedy for nothing else. A banner once lifted in the wind can be lifted by memory. A square once filled by flame can be filled by silence that honors it. Last post. History is where the noise of verdicts fades enough to hear the person inside the trial. What we hear in Rouen is a farm girl who learned to speak like a trumpet and died speaking like a prayer, a court that called that prayer insubordination, and a city that lived long enough to change its mind. The rest, the silver helm, the lilies on blue, the horses, the smoke, is scenery and evidence both. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.